Welcome back, TK fans. Jane here, and today we're going to talk about entering stakes races. Now, stakes races are run on 2 days of the week. They're run on Mondays and Fridays. Now, for stakes racing, there's a couple of ways you can search for a stakes race. First, you can go down to the bottom of your screen, and you'll see Around the World. And you can go to each of the different regions and pick a track and then enter one of the races that way. Another way you can do it, if you have OC, is to go to Races page and search for a race. Here you can go and you can search by each region, and you can go by what type of race you want to enter, when the race will be run, what race distance, and also for what class or any other specific requirements you might have. Now, I have already gone through and searched for a few races that'll work for us. First, we have this lovely race called Brody's Stakes, and it's in Australia. We can see that there's 12 other runners, and it's a possibility that we might have a shot in this race. Now, one of the main things you want to look for when you are first starting for races, when you go and search, you'll see that there's a couple of different types of races for C4 players or C5, whichever class you may be entering. When you enter, there are all class races, and there's typically C4 through C6 races. To start out with, you really want to only enter the C4 through C6 races. This is because they are only against players in your class and lower. They do not have the C1 and C2 and C3 players who have been around for some time, understand basic game mechanics, and how best to get their horses to run. Also, the purses may be slightly smaller, but so are the stakes. There are C1 races with anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 or even $100,000 stakes. To start out with, going for a race that has $100,000 stakes is not the best idea. They are usually extremely competitive, and they tend to have some of the best players in the game because the purses can be so large. There's nothing that keeps you from running in the race, but remember from the league racing video, you do not get money unless you get in the top 5 in stakes races. And if there are only a certain number of players in that game, in that race, there may not even be enough to cover the stakes entry. So when you first start out, try to find races where you're making more money than what the stakes is. So I've gone and found a couple of that will fit for us. Here, this first one is in Australia, and it's a good fit. We may not make first place, but second and third place, and even fifth place, we make a profit. So here we'll do and go and enter a horse into this race. And we'll pick Improver. And we'll pick our apprentice jockey. Try not to use the unnamed jockeys unless you have multiple jockeys, multiple horses running on the same day. So we'll complete this race entry. And you'll say, are you sure you wish to book this race? And we'll say, okay. Oh no! Our entry has been canceled. Why is this? If we read the summary, it'll tell you that there's not enough time before the race to complete travel arrangements. And why is this? We're racing in Europe. That is where our stable is based. The earliest, it takes a total of 12 hours to race outside of Europe to get to that race. And then on top of that, we need to be there 3 hours before the race to make sure that the horse is ready to race. But the jockey does not need to be there 3 hours before post time. The jockey can be there 1 minute before and still make the race. Seems kind of unfair, I know. But with this, we have now realized that we don't have enough time to get to this race. It's 2000 hours, and we would need our horse to be there by 2300 hours. That's just not going to work for a race for tomorrow. Also, you'll see that to do a 12-hour flight, you have to book that the day before. And for us to make that flight and also make it there by 2300 hours, we would need to leave well before noon the day before. Now remember, these times are based off of TK time, not European time or your specific time zone. So there is actually even more of a time difference. That is why you need to make sure you know your time zones in the game. Because remember, TK time cannot be changed. Now, we have just realized we can't enter this race, so we'll exit out of it. So the next one we have is in Asia. This is also a good race, and we actually probably have a pretty good shot. There's only one other named jockey in the race, so we're going to say enter a horse into this race. We'll say we'll go with Improve again and go to next step. And we'll use our apprentice jockey. We'll say okay. And oh no, it's happened again. What has happened? The exact same thing. The horse needs to be at the track by 2:30 a.m. and our horse can't make that travel. So we'll just have to find another race. Here's another one, and this one is in Africa. We should have a shot at this one. And as you can see, there's only one other named jockey. Now, typically speaking, having a named jockey with a horse means that that horse will actually possibly listen to the jockey. Whereas an unlisted apprentice is basically like throwing dice. You have no idea what the jockey is going to do. That is why it is always recommended to use a named jockey that is at least an apprentice. Pro jockeys typically do much better than apprentice jockeys. But when you're first starting out the game, an apprentice jockey should be able to get you through most of your races until you have a little more money, because pro jockeys cost a lot more than your apprentice jockeys. So we'll say enter this race, and we'll go with Improve again. And we'll go with our apprentice jockey. It has happened yet again. Now, even though this race is at noon, because we have to be there by 9:30, our horse physically just can't get there in time for that 3-hour window. If we continue on to our different regions, we'll find that the only two regions that you can enter is the European continent, any one of those races, or whatever your home continent is. Now you can typically get into any one of those races by 2300 hours, or the United States. The United States has the latest closing times, and their races are run much later, at 1600 hours. So even if you leave at midnight the day before, you'll still make it in time for the race. But it is the only region that everyone can enter late. Now, a caveat to that, though, is that Typically, people will enter those races very late and at the last minute, and you can have some bigger horses come in on your race accidentally. Now we are going to enter this race. It's in Europe, which means we still have the ability to get there. We're going to use Improv. Now remember what I said earlier. Racing a horse whose vet assessment is less than vigorous is not a wise decision. And in stakes racing and racing part 2, you'll find out why. And this is because horses typically get injured if they are not at vigorous health. And an injured horse does not run well, as you will find out. We'll use our apprentice jockey, and we'll say OK. Now this will come up. There's a stake that you have to pay, and then you also have to pay for your jockey and your horse to get to the location and back from the location. To start out with, using the automatic bookings is probably your best bet until you really understand how long it takes to travel a horse from point A to point B. Now, in doing this, you'll also see that there's a cost associated with that. Racing in your region will cost less than racing in your continent or even outside of your continent. The most expensive racing is always outside of your continent, so be aware if you're short on money. You'll have to come back the next day and make sure you set your race instructions for the race. Now that we have our horse in the race, we just have to wait for it to happen. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.